on extending financial services to everybody, including the poorest of the poor, by essentially building a common open platform for financial transactions. It's an open source network that allows financial institutions, governments, nonprofits, microfinance organizations to connect to each other in a Swift-like manner so that they become interoperable directly between themselves. We are not building services for consumers. We're building the back end. We are the infrastructure that all these great companies that you've seen today can connect to get Swift-like services between one another. So somebody had an earlier question today, why don't the great remittance companies that we saw on the last panel extend across the world? It's because it's hard and expensive to do that, but on a platform like Stellar, it becomes very easy for that to happen. We launched about a year ago, and since then, we have about 4 million accounts on the platform through various partnerships and people using it, mostly in Southeast Asia, but it's still early days. So I'm going to explain what Stellar is and the benefits it has to remittances, but I'm going to do it in the context of this question that you guys see in here. What is the impact of infrastructure on efficiency, right? That's one particular way of looking at infrastructure. So to start with this, what are we looking at? We've heard this term today used earlier. We're looking at silos. It could represent farming equipment. It could represent water storage. It's actually also representative of our financial infrastructure today. You can look at each of those silos and see things like PayPal or M-Pesa or Bcash or SEPA or ACH. It is very hard to hop from one of these networks to the other. And this actually leads to increased costs. The inefficient infrastructure that we have today leads to friction, and friction leads to increased costs and reduced opportunities, which makes it quite hard for creating a system that allows you to send small transactions of 5 cents or 10 cents. So when we think about this, we can think about other industries where we've had this problem, right? One particular case in point would be transportation. There once was a time when transportation was also separate and siloed. Here, since we're sitting in the United Nations today, you guys all ride the subway, or maybe rode the subway to get here. All the subway lines used to be different companies. And then they decided to make them interoperable. And today we have the New York City subway lines. They've decided to coalesce around one standard. There's another example that we can look at, which is mail. So if we look at the history of mail, it went from separate silos to an interoperable network. And that transition was initially courier services. If you were wealthy, you could hire your Pony Express to go send your message to somebody else. From there, we evolved to nationally interoperable systems known as the postal services. And in any given country, you could send mail to another country or domestically for a small fee. And then the next evolution of that is what's sitting on everybody's desks right now, your email. So now you can send a message to anybody instantly in the world at pretty much no cost. Right? So we see this inevitable evolution from separate silos to participatory and networked systems. But then we're coming to probably the most impactful version that we've seen today, knowledge and information. There once was a time when if you wanted to learn about science or math or the arts, you had to have access to a university education and you had to have access to a library. And something changed all of that, the internet. Right? The internet democratized access to knowledge. And with that now, anybody can learn how a plane flies or what makes the sun rise every morning. And this is something that was actually inconceivable just a few decades past. To give actually a really fun history example that I learned when I was kind of thinking about this slide today, before the internet was the internet, it was a series of disconnected intranets. Each company or institution had their own ability to share information locally. And then somebody came up with the idea, or actually many people came up with the idea of what is known as the internet today and connected all of these systems into an interoperable network. And when you look at some of the earliest writings of the internet, there was a memo from ARPA in the 1960s, and this is a quote from the memo. The writer imagined as an electronic commons open to all. And this electronic commons was meant to be the main and essential medium of informational interaction for governments, institutions, corporations, and individuals. And he called this network the Galactic Network. The Galactic Network. And that's not why we're called Stellar, but it's pretty fitting. So now we're going to talk about the future. We've had our introduction to the historical evolution away from silos towards networked participatory networks. How does this impact remittances? How can our financial transactions keep up with our migratory lives today? There's probably not a single person in this room that has only stayed in one country their entire lives. Things have changed, and our financial capabilities have to change with our lives. So this is where we get technical, so you guys really want to pay attention now. So Stellar functions on 3 levels, and the basic level is the network, right? There are servers on the Stellar network that keep the system functioning and safe. Anybody can run one of these servers, and each of these servers contains the shared database of all of the accounts on the network. So each of these servers holds the complete snapshot of everybody's balances and transactions. The servers then stay in sync with each other via a method known as consensus, and this is kind of like the very new tech thing here. Consensus is cryptographically secure. It is a way to figure out how do we agree on this database when you don't know how many people are voting in that particular round. So we developed a system that allows us to do that. And what you're looking at here is actually, that's it. That's the Stellar network. It's that simple on its base level. Where it gets really interesting is the next level up. This is kind of where the magic happens. How do other people connect to this network of servers? So one level up from that are gateways. Gateways are essentially entities that can accept deposits and record them into the network or issue credits to users to a particular account in the system. Remember, the system is still that shared database structure. And the gateways in Stellar are similar to what websites are to the internet. The internet is a core protocol, and the websites are built on top of it as ways for people to interact with the internet. And gateways are the ways people interact with this financial protocol. Anybody can be a gateway, but if you are interacting with money, you should be a licensed organization like a bank or a remittance company or a microfinance organization. If it's not currency, then you can actually be anybody. You can be any kind of gateway. So when you think, what would be a gateway that's non-currency, some examples that we've seen are prepaid mobile minutes, because mobile minutes credits are actually currency-like in a lot of countries. Loyalty points, your airline miles are non-currency credits that people accumulate, and food rations in refugee camps. Right? Those are all things that are very important to track on a per-person basis, and all of them can be brought into the network. And this is actually how Stellar lets databases that are otherwise not compatible with each other to communicate with each other in an efficient manner. So then the next level up from that is users and services. These are all developed at the local level. And if you think that this looks a lot like the internet, it does, it's intentional. Right? We are designing financial services to behave a lot more like the internet. We need to reach more people. And the reality is that banking has been around for millennia, and the internet and mobile services have only been around for 40, 50, 60 years. And the mobile services and the internet already reach more people than banking. Right? So let's think of new architecture systems that will allow us to do the same. So how does this work for remittances? How do we send money around the world? I'm going to use the example of British pounds to Nigerian naira. Imagine that you have a person named Alex who lives in the UK, and he wants to send £5 to his sister Belle who lives in Nigeria, and only needs £5. Maybe it's a case where there's an emergency medical situation where they just need to buy a little bit of medicine, not a huge remittance amount, but a small remittance amount. So what Alex does is he goes to his remittance company, and if his remittance company is connected to Stellar, then the remittance company is able to transmit the £5 to the network. So a couple of things I want you to note as I go through this example. It is cross-border, it is cross-currency, and it is a small amount. In Silicon Valley, we call it a microtransaction. Everywhere else, we call it a transaction. So, the amount is, to be honest, should be irrelevant to how we think about these solutions. So if his remittance company is already connected to the network, he transmits the £5 to the network. And then what happens is inside of Stellar, there is an internal peer-to-peer currency exchange where the world's transactions are freely available to everybody else. The network looks for what is essentially the best rate and trades the pounds for the naira. So this creates a flatter marketplace and more efficient rates. From here, the £5 is converted into roughly 1,540 naira, which would be the market rate, and Belle's mobile money provider could receive that and then sends it to her digital wallet in 10 seconds or less. So what Stellar does is it effectively moves £5 to naira across border, across currency in less than 10 seconds. The fees don't really exist in the network. There is a small micro fee that is essentially eaten by the network as a DOS protection, it's an anti-spam methodology. The cost for that is 1 penny will essentially get you 300,000 transactions. So it's fairly irrelevant. If you had to pay 1 penny to prepay for 300,000 transactions, I think it's a good deal. So what happens here then? Note that also what Stellar does is it makes any currency into a digital currency. So it brings the benefits of Bitcoin to the dollar, to the naira, to the pound, to the peso, to any currency that you want, because it's what the gateways then deposit into the network themselves. So what about KYC? How does KYC work in here? Every gateway is able to flag a setting where they can say, if this user is KYC, then I will allow my transaction to flow to that person. So if Alex tries to send the transaction to Zenny who is not KYC'd, the network will automatically reject the transaction and the transaction will fail. So it allows that remittance company on the front end to decide who is able to access it on the other end. So that's it in a nutshell. This is essentially how we work to create a unified system that connects the world's 180 currencies in about 2 to 5 seconds. You can go across any currency. Any company can plug in. So it can be a mobile money company, a bank, a remittance company, BitPesa, Globe One. All of these folks become interoperable on this platform. One use case that I was thinking about hearing everybody talk is the idea of, I've been hearing in the UN refugee camps, there's now debit cards that are being issued, which I think is fascinating. If the debit card system was attached to Stellar and people's home bank accounts were attached to Stellar, then they would actually be able to access their home funds and not be as separated from their economic resources. A potential use case that could work in these situations. So who can use Stellar? We are an open network. There is no membership. It's like TCP/IP for the internet. Who can use the internet? Who decides who can use the internet? That's not for us to decide. That's for the world to decide. So people that have been interested in it are financial institutions, banks, microfinance organizations, farmers co-ops, governments, NGOs, obviously a lot of startups, nonprofits, and community groups. And one example that I wanted to kind of show that was interesting is it allows any company that connects to have the potential ability to transact with any other company, which means somebody in the UAE can then decide to start transacting with Europe because Europe is already on the network, or said currency is already on the network. So I wanted to kind of get to closing with one example of a project that's happening on the Stellar network. In South Africa, we're working with an amazing nonprofit down there known as Prekelt Foundation, and they're working on creating mobile savings accounts for girls on feature phones where the girls are able to deposit cash or airtime. And they're able to then save airtime as a savings account. And the amazing thing is that the purpose of this program is actually not necessarily to provide the girls with lots of savings, but to keep them in school for 1 more year. Because financial access is the conduit to getting people towards better life and results. So this is one of the projects that we're working on. It focuses a lot on digital financial literacy as we talk about crossing the digital divide. How do we get large swaths of communities more comfortable with digital financial services? And Prekelt is starting with girls in school, trying to keep them in school by feeling economically empowered with an independent identity. So I often get asked, why is Stellar a nonprofit? Coming from Silicon Valley, it's not something you typically see. We decided to become a nonprofit because this is actually really important. This type of infrastructure should be owned by everybody, and it should be owned by nobody, just like the internet is today. And that's why we chose to be a not-for-profit. If we had taken any other path, it would lead to a very different future. What if the internet was owned by a company? Right? Like what would our world look like today if it was a proprietary technology? So we made the choice to be a nonprofit and to make everything open source. So that is why Stellar is a not-for-profit. So I just like to say, if this has triggered any use cases or questions that you guys may have, please feel free to reach out. I urge you all to not sit by and watch this happen. You guys should all lead, and I think we actually do have a room full of leaders here. So thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for this interesting presentation and examples of what you are doing, so that the rest of us could also possibly understand a little bit. But I'm sure that there will be questions on that. Before I open the floor, I would also actually like to ask Amy if you could demonstrate a little bit BitPesa in action, so that give an example of it, how it works also by sending money.
Yeah, absolutely. So
That would be great. Yeah.
pull up our website. Okay, while we're setting it up, is there anyone in the room who has M-Pesa? Yeah. It's a very international. You do? In your card? Perfect. M-Pesa. So I'm going to M-Pesa. Oh, okay. Unfortunately, I have my U.S. SIM card in. Otherwise, we could do the whole thing end to end. But a whopping
we're setting it up now. So
a whopping $2. So I'm going to send Bitcoin, convert it to M-Pesa. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to just see whether they are connected to the internet, right? No.
You can closely watch her password and account number.
Yeah. That's right. You'll actually see all the extra security measures we have.
UN Wi-Fi.
Yeah, my dear. No, give me.
And if anyone is really interested, there is free Wi-Fi here. You can download a Bitcoin wallet in just a few seconds. I mean, just go to the Play Store, iTunes Store, whatever it is, and look for Bitcoin wallet. There are hundreds of them, and they're all free.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite wallet, Joyce?
No, all my Bitcoins are cold storage. Like, but they're too easy to lose. So
I can send you. Raise.
Why isn't it the coolest way?
Huh? Well, it's very hot in Africa. So.
This way. Doesn't it?
Okay, I'm not sure why the page isn't loading. I'm not sure why the page isn't loading completely, but let's see. Let's see if I can remember my password. Have to steal my phone too?
Put your microphone
on. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with two-factor, the whole purpose is you have to steal the password and the phone. So,
It's like ours.
for some reason, we're really struggling to load here. All right.
No, no.
Yeah, it keeps refreshing.
No. You can just put that.
Let's use Chrome.
So this gives everybody else the time to think about really sharp questions that you want to
Well, maybe
put
we
to
could
them.
even gather questions in the meantime. Feel bad slowing things
Yeah,
down.
maybe we should do that. If
Okay.
should we
there
give it
go.
another? Yeah, you're on.
While she's doing that, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes, maybe we should then.
Oh, you know what? I just got it.
Are you ready to go
I'm
now?
ready,
Then
I'm
you
ready.
will not ask a question, Dilip. I will give the floor back to Amy.
All right, so this is the
Yeah.
site. I mean, this isn't going to be too elaborate because actually our whole site is pretty simple. But you can see on the side, I have all my contacts. Now, this is after I've signed up for the platform. So as you can imagine, the very first time you sign in, you have to provide all of your basic KYC and upload a passport scan, which we verify. So you can see I actually pay for a lot of things through our platform, not to plug it, but pay my dry cleaners. I pay a lot of people. So, so I would add someone new if anyone in here had M-Pesa, and I could send them money. But since that isn't the case, I'll just send money to myself, which again I do quite a bit. So my information on the left, that contact, is stored. I can add a new contact if I wanted to, but really all we need for a contact is name. Name and email address aren't even required. Really all you need is a phone number. And that's because in Kenya and Tanzania, as some of you probably already know, KYC is required when you register for a SIM card. So KYC on the beneficiary side is already taken care of. So I'll send myself some money, just 200 shillings, that's about $2. You can see it's pretty simple and instant. It says if you want to send 200 shillings, you pay 0.0086 Bitcoin, and the recipient will receive 200 shillings. So the way we do our pricing is we take the absolute best foreign exchange rate we can possibly find, and then we mark it up by 3%. No flat fees. It's always 3%. So if you're sending very small transactions, obviously it's extremely cost effective. So I click accept the price, and now what I see is this is my wallet. It's like my bank account instructions. So what I'm asking the sender to do is to send Bitcoin to this address. You can do that a few different ways. There are wallets you can have on your computer, but I'm going to use my phone wallet. So I have exactly $5.26 worth of Bitcoin on my phone, thankfully. So what I can do is, if this were on my computer, I would copy and paste this address. But since I have it on my phone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a picture. So have this camera setting. I'm going to take a picture of this QR code on the screen here. So the moment I took that picture, it's already populated the information. It pulls the address and the amount, 0.0086, a really tiny amount. So all I do is click send, confirm, yes. Okay, my phone tells me it was a success, and hopefully pretty soon our website, and it was a success. So I could have been in China, and we're sitting in Kenya, and that's how fast I can accept money. And it isn't just that money, I've received a notification. That money is genuinely in BitPessa's account. It's ours. So it doesn't matter how tiny the transaction is. We don't have to wait 2 days for a SWIFT transfer. We don't have to wait a day for a payment processor to credit our bank account. This is credit risk free. The moment we receive the Bitcoin, it's ours. It's like cash. So that's kind of cool. If I had my Kenyan SIM in, I would have received a message by now saying that I received 200 shillings worth of M-Pesa. So yeah, that's it. That's the demo. It's pretty simple.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that demonstration. And I think with that, we can open the floor for questions from the audience. I know that Dilip wanted to put a question. No? Okay, he doesn't. Please.
Hello. Okay, so electronic money transfer. I'm just wondering, how is it possible for the central bank to keep record of this? Because when someone is sending money, it comes to hits our balance of payment and eventually foreign currency reserve. So electronic money, how does the central bank keep record of this?
Thank you very much. I'll gather a few questions and then I'll let you answer. So I saw Christoph Thomas, please.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I just have some very practical questions. How you would market this service to people in rural areas or people who generally don't have any experiences of mobile phone technology or banking services. And if you compare with M-Pesa and the relatively quick success they experienced in Kenya, how would you describe that? What kind of strategy is behind that kind of success in a short time? Thanks.
Thank you. And then I saw John Bingham. Please, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you both, if I could, to react to a sentence that's in the migration development brief from the World Bank. It's a sentence that says, concerns over money laundering are keeping costs high by increasing compliance costs for commercial banks and money transfer operators and delaying the entry of new players and the use of mobile technology. I'm just a little bit lost on how this can move so quickly and so cheaply, and the rest of the system seems blocked by regulators.
Thank you, John. I'll take one more question from you, please, and then we'll gather another round after that. Thank you.
To both Amy and Joyce, what are the risks? What about information security? What's being done about that? And with Joyce in particular, so what's the revenue model that you? I mean, how do you? I know you are a non-profit; you don't make money, but you maintain. How do you pay for your existence?
You want to copy the model?
That's an important and good question. So, shall we start with you, Joyce, and then I'll give the floor to
Yes. Do you
Amy
want me to
after that.
answer all of them, or
The ones that you find relevant for your presentation. Please go ahead. You can choose here.
All right. So the answers for the first question about the central banks, it'll be a little bit different for the Stellar network than for pure Bitcoin. With Stellar, the local currencies are brought on board via these gateway entities, and gateway entities are domiciled in a jurisdiction. They are accepting local currency deposits, so there is no requirement to use an alternative currency, right? They can stay in whatever the currency is. It just happens to have a digital record of it. So that gateway still has to comply with all local regulations and would still fit into the existing system. So Stellar is not necessarily a wholesale replacement of what's there. It's about making what's there interoperable, and that interoperability allows for greater flexibility so that people can start adding services to kind of closer to the base of the pyramid level of community development, right? So it's actually pretty much the same as regular money in Stellar in that sense. In terms of the how do we market to rural areas, since we're a back-end service, we're just infrastructure that other people can build to. It's up to, we see a lot of local services starting to integrate with us, and they already have existing networks. So what they have are communities that they're serving, they're just trying to serve them better. Right? So a case in point would be we're doing another project in Nigeria with microfinance organizations, and what the microfinance organizations are asking for is an ability to transact with each other in a SWIFT-like manner, because they have most of their, like a lot of the young folks live in Lagos and send money home to the rural areas. There's microfinance organizations in both communities, but those microfinance organizations cannot transact with each other. There's no way of sending, so they're trying to use Stellar to do that back-end connection. So for us, it's not so much about marketing to a new audience. It's about serving who's there through organizations that are already in the market, that already have community trust, a good reputation, things that are also required for financial services that are more softer. So that's kind of where we fit in. Let's see here. In terms of the risks, the info security, are you talking about the actual payments, or are you talking about the identity side of things?
The fact that you have a network and how secure it is.
Right. So both Bitcoin and Stellar are cryptographically, they're built on very well-defined cryptographic principles. So the actual protocols are to break them, you pretty much break a lot of other things that rule our technology lives. Where the true attack vectors are, from a security perspective, are the companies that interface with these protocols. It's like typically the website administrator that has servers that are left unprotected on that level. So that's where people typically do the attacks. That is on the service level, not on the protocol level, right? And for that, you have to trust where you put your money, right? Like that's why we put our money in Chase Bank instead of, I don't know, mybank.net. I don't know if there's a mybank.net. If there is, I'm sorry. But we choose to bank with or deposit our money with places that are secure, that have those teams. In terms of our revenue model, we are doing things like foundation grants, and we started off with essentially $3 million from a payments startup in Silicon Valley that believed that this type of technology needs to exist. So we are starting off with that, and then from there, foundation grants.
Just one more comment on the central bank monitoring. at least for our case and for the case of most exchanges, there's always going to be a fiat traditional transaction tied to every transaction. So every transaction we do is inherently traceable by the central bank. And if we then send money out of the country, that's still done through a traditional banking structure. So part of what our business is we still interact with the traditional banking infrastructure. We just make it a little bit more simple for the clients in terms of interacting and sending small amounts of money. So we spare them the having to work with banks in that regard.
Every transaction is recorded through the central bank.
Well, every transaction is recorded through M-Pesa, which is then reported to the central bank. Exactly. Because every transaction is M-Pesa in exchange for Bitcoin or Bitcoin in exchange for M-Pesa. So there's always M-Pesa or Tanzanian shilling, whatever it is in the local jurisdiction. There's always a traditional money component. Right. And then how to market to rural areas. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you can probably see, I mean, some of the people I have on this list. I've got water delivery. She operates a hotel. I had my dry cleaners on there. You know, I have a lot of friends. So none of these people have any idea that Bitcoin was involved in the transaction. All they receive is M-Pesa on their phone. So only the sender needs to know what Bitcoin or digital currency is, and eventually they won't even need to know that. They'll just log on to their local Bitcoin exchange and send M-Pesa directly. The Bitcoin will just happen between us and the other digital currency exchange. So, I mean, in terms of, you know, overcoming rural education, half the battle is already won because only the sender needs to know what's going on, if that answers the question. And obviously we have a marketing team that's on the ground educating people all day, every day, so. All right, and then the cost of compliance, that's a really great question. So part of the reason we were able to launch so quickly is because, like I said, we aren't licensed locally in Africa. Obviously, we know the central bankers intimately well. You know, we are in very close communication with them. They know everything we're doing, and we actually send them regular reports. However, we didn't have to go through the licensing process, so that was a cost and time savings. However, we have been inhibited in being able to transact in the U.S. So we currently do not solicit U.S. customers because the U.S. is the only country in the world that currently regulates Bitcoin businesses. And by that, I mean Bitcoin exchanges are considered money transmitters, which means you have to get 50 licenses across 50 states. It might be something like 44, I don't know. Yeah, 47. Yeah, so I mean, there are a few states that don't care. But I mean, it's an insurmountable cost at our current size and scale. Obviously, it's something we will address at some point in the future as we grow, but right now the market's big enough elsewhere. But it does inhibit our ability to do business, especially in a country with great internet access and everyone's internet savvy and familiar with digital payments. So, you know, it's difficult to have to set that market aside for now.
Thank you very much. And we can go for another round. I had already IOM, Mr. Al-Noor.
Thank you for interesting presentation. Thank you for interesting presentation. That I'm still trying to digest. Listening to what you told us, I could see that both technologies are comparable in the sense that the way they both function is across border, across currency, and that you seek to do business on low cost and make it affordable to whoever is interested. But on the other hand, you seem to be facing also common challenges, especially when it comes to risk management and how you do that, the legal framework, and if there is any differences or disagreement, how the arbitration could work, and then how you would sell this or promote it or make it friendly, user-friendly to the people that they need really to use this technology. I think this is the common challenges that both technologies face, and it would be good to hear your perspective and different point of views on both. And one point that I would like to add, since January last year, in Kenya, the Kenyan government hosted the African Institute for Remittances. This is an institute that has been launched under the auspices of the African Union and with a mission to make technologies available and innovative approaches in order to reduce the cost of remittances, make it safe, and maybe they could be interested in getting to know about what you have and maybe help in the application of that at a continental-wide scale. This is some suggestions that I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I think that Dilip had a question. Yes, and you too, Sonia. You will. Dilip, go ahead.
For Stella. Joyce, I would like to know, you are a backup function, but how, in which countries and how the convertibility, because you said that you operate in local currency through an institution. Could you explain a little bit more, because it was not clear on that? Is Stellar's, or is Stellar Bitcoin, or is how the local currency? And I wanted to ask to Amy, given that we have here central bank governors, we have chief economists from central banks, I would like to see, what you would like to see as not the best practice, but ideal in the world as a regulatory framework, or what do you, what will be 3 things that you would like to see in the regulatory framework, or what the central banks or the Minister of Finance should take into consideration so we can take advantage of Bitcoin, and transfer and remittances? That's a big.
Thank you. Then please, Dilip.
Thank you, Eva. I think it's an excellent presentation, and I saw the demo of BitPesa, as I mentioned yesterday, from Elizabeth last week, and I was really impressed that she managed to create my mobile wallet and Bitcoin wallet, and then send me $2 worth of Kenyan shillings from Nairobi account, and that cost 1 penny, and I sent her back the 199. So we did all of that during the course of small remittances under $10. Are just not imaginable in the case of international remittances. And I was quite struck by that. So operationally speaking, one issue that used to worry me was the exchange rate fluctuation. And if it takes like no time, then there is no fluctuation by definition. So in that sense, that's not a worry. Fraud was another worry in my mind. And there I have begun to have a sense of confidence that the programs are quite stable and not easy to break in. In fact, it might be easier to break into a bank vault than to these programs. That's what I have been told. That's a remarkable feature. The third feature that I have come to appreciate more is the blockchain and the public registry of the transactions. And there, I'm now beginning to make a speech here, sorry, Eva, but I thought it would be worth pointing out in terms of gap filling of the information that I have learned over the last 4 to 5 months. In the Bitcoin blockchain technology, for which virtual currency and money transfer is one application, but there are many other kind of applications that one can think of. Every transaction is recorded, and you can probably write it in the program that, what if you had a situation when you gave, let's say, $1 million to Nepal earthquake now to a charity, and the charity, the guys who received on the other side decided to buy a Mercedes instead, a car. And what if the money you gave sort of said at the time of the point of contact, when the money is given to the Mercedes dealer, the money says, no, I won't buy that for you. That is the equivalent that I see of blockchain application. I don't know if you got that message across. It's not like somebody else is telling you that you can't do it. The money itself basically says you can't do it. It is password protected. It is protected against these transactions. It only allows these transactions. That's what I understood as the technical feasibility of the blockchain technology right now. It can do that. And I see a lot of applications in the aid and charity domain where you can literally say that this aid is for building that bridge or that road or that airport or buying that sack of rice and nothing else. And you can then send a report back as well. It is all there in the registry. So these are some of the characteristics that I was really taken by, and it all comes at a very cheap cost, almost no cost. I mean, of course, there's a fixed investment, but apparently the fixed investment of building the virtual currency that is customized to your purpose is not as high as it seems. So these are some of the things that I was really taken by. So now I would like to ask a very simple question to both of you, but these are two separate questions to each of you. So, Joyce, what is the difference between, in your mind, Stellar and BitPesa? And to you, what is the difference between BitPesa and Stellar?
Yes, I'll take one more question over there, please. I'm sorry for pointing. I don't see your sign, please.
I'm French speaking. I don't know if I can speak French or to speak English, and I say it's not good English.
I would like to ask you to please try in English because we don't have any interpretation.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's better for me. Voilà, donc je vous remercie. Moi, je suis du Sénégal.
Thank you all. I come from Senegal.
Et peut-être c'est une chance pour vous que je sois ici parce que je vis au Sénégal et que la plupart des programmes qu'ils exposent ici sont orientés vers les pays de l'Afrique.
So I'm happy to be here, and especially because many programs that are presented here today are oriented towards Africa.
Ok, donc moi, en tant qu'Africain et destinataire de ces programmes,
As African and recipient of these programs,
je ne vois aucune différence entre les différents procédés d'envoi d'argent entre l'Europe et l'Afrique.
I think that every programs are basically the same and have common points.
Parce que le premier système que nous avons connu, c'est Western Union.
The first system we knew was Western Union.
Et tous les programmes sont basés peut-être sur cette base.
And all the programs we have seen today are based on this system.
Ok. Et tout ce que nous avons, l'intérêt des programmes qu'ils développent ici pour ceux qui reçoivent l'argent, je pense que c'est la facilité pour la récupération qui doit être leur objectif.
The key objective that all these programs have to reach, and the key goal they have to reach, is the easiness for recipients to get their money.
Parce que les gens qui reçoivent, leur problème, ce n'est pas celui qui envoie combien il paye de taxes, mais la manière dont, la facilité qu'il a pour récupérer son argent dans la journée ou bien même si c'est dans le week-end.
Because for the recipient, he doesn't care about the costs of remittances, about how much the sender has paid. He cares about how quick and easy he can get his remittance.
Et il faut aussi qu'il sache que tous ces systèmes-là ont été piratés. Tous les systèmes qu'ils ont utilisés ici ont été piratés.
You also all have to know that all the systems that you've presented today have been done in another way, informally.
Il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont parvenus à percer leur système de sécurité.
And also, hackers have managed to go through their security systems.
Parce que souvent, c'est basé sur le nom et un numéro de code.
Because often it's based on the name on the ID card and a code.
Et souvent, dans nos pays, nous avons, vous dites, Mamadou Ndiaye. You can get 10 or 11 Mamadou Ndiaye.
And often in our countries like Senegal, if you're called Mamadou Ndiaye, then there's several hundreds and even thousands of Mamadou Ndiaye.
Yeah. If you get a code, you go. S'il a le code, il va directement à la banque. C'est pas souvent des banques, mais c'est des agences qui sont dédiées et ils reçoivent l'argent. Le véritable destinataire vient, on lui dit que l'argent est déjà retiré.
So if someone gets the code and goes to take the money in the cash out agency, he just get the money, and the true recipient, if he arrives too late, then he won't get the money.
Ok. Et aussi, nous avons aussi les agences qui sont dédiées, leurs correspondants dans les pays. Souvent, ce ne sont pas des banques, parce que les banques, je sais qu'ils leur font payer cher. Ils vont dans des structures de finance, hein, qui souvent n'ont pas l'argent à disposition tout le temps.
So often the recipients don't go to local banks, they go to cash out agencies that run out of money quite easily.
Okay. Quand vous venez avec votre code et tout, ils vous disent que le code n'est pas bon.
They just tell you that the code is not good.
Yeah. Pour gagner du temps. Et je crois que ça, c'est ce qu'ils devaient faire pour ces problèmes de système, ces systèmes de transfert. Actuellement, par exemple au Sénégal, nous avons au moins 10 systèmes qui sont locaux. C'est des systèmes locaux qui sont traités par des Sénégalais et qui nous permettent tout le temps, aujourd'hui, même si tu veux envoyer 1000 francs, tu ne te déplaces pas.
So what's the most efficient for, as for Senegal, as example, is there local systems that are developed locally by Senegalese people to make sure that you can have your money easily and quickly through their local systems.
Okay.
Donc c'est la contribution que je voulais leur donner.
So this is what I wanted to say today.
Thank you very much for not only for your question but also for your description about the situation. I have now 4 different questions for you to address, parts of them that you want to address, and then I still have 3 more questions after that, and that's it. So I will come back to you who are waving now, and but I'll let you,
Sure.
so it doesn't get to be too difficult to handle. Please.
So the answers to actually the first 3 questions is actually quite similar. Like, what are the common challenges? How are they different? What are the risks that we see? So I would say that actually there's BitPesa is a service that's built on top of Bitcoin, right? So there's this layered cake that we're about to see. Bitcoin is a currency and a protocol. So then rather than say Stellar and BitPesa, it would actually be more equivalent to say Stellar and Bitcoin, right? Because BitPesa is probably actually one of my favorite companies building on the Bitcoin protocol. Stellar and Bitcoin are orthogonal to each other. They have different purposes. So on some level, Stellar sits on top of Bitcoin and on top of dollars and on top of pesos and on top of everything to make them interoperable with each other. What Bitcoin's core focus is that it is a store of value, and it is a way to send that store of value. that store of value on the Bitcoin protocol is the Bitcoin currency itself. So it's a little troublesome because they're named the same thing. So it's a little bit confusing for folks, but they are different purposes. So Bitcoin is a transport mechanism for Bitcoins, and Stellar's goal is to make everything interoperable, make Bitcoins interoperable with dollars, with Visa, with Bcash, or with whatever the case may be. And as we had the benefit of starting a little bit later than Bitcoin. In fact, our CTO, who's sitting here with us today, he's quite well known in the Bitcoin space. He made the first Bitcoin exchange. He's always on the list of who made Bitcoin, but it's not him. If it was, he probably wouldn't be allowed to have entered the building. But so Jed McCaleb is sitting over there with us. And when Jed started to architect the system, there were a number of things that we thought about regards to Bitcoin and what it was really good at. And it's really good at providing this kind of like open way of moving Bitcoins around. There were certain challenges that we saw as we moved into the developing world. And since then, companies like BitPesa are doing a really good job of mediating some of these risks. But these risks are core to the Bitcoin protocol when we're talking about communities that don't have a lot of money. And what those are that we see is that for a Bitcoin transaction to be confirmed, you have to wait for what is known as a block to be mined, and it takes about 6 to 10 minutes. So you guys are showing it as instant, but you're bearing the risk for that. Yeah. So the Bitcoin protocol recommends that you wait for 6 blocks for a fully verified transaction, which is about 1 hour. So BitPesa is taking on that risk and that currency risk themselves. But if you did not have an intermediary like BitPesa, then the user has to kind of wait for that hour for that confirmation to happen. The other thing is that built into the protocol for Bitcoin is a fee that when you look at the writings by one of the core developers, he recommends a 20-cent fee per transaction on a mining level, which I think you guys are also bearing that as well. If there's not an intermediary bearing it, it goes on to the user. And 20 cents per transaction is not realistic in a lot of places in the world where we're looking at. Especially if you're dealing with a $2 a day community, 20 cents is 10% of their income. And then the other thing is that when you're in Bitcoin, there are significant currency volatility, like this exchange rate issue that you were mentioning. Twice in my life, I've seen Bitcoin drop 30% in half an hour, right? And that's not a risk that I would feel comfortable putting onto a community that is underserved. So when we looked at these things, we thought, well, how can we work? We're heavily inspired by Bitcoin. We want to make Bitcoin interoperable for a lot of things. I think Bitcoin works really well for the US and Europe and a lot of these situations where people aren't as sensitive to those edge cases, right? But those edge cases are quite important for the communities that we all look at around the world. So we designed certain elements of the Stellar protocol to alleviate that. Number one is that you can function in local currency, right? So what does that mean? There was a question over here. What does it mean to bring local currency on? Stellar at its core is a database system. So then if you are a remittance company that functions in dollars and peso, you are just using the Stellar database to record your dollars and pesos. So there is no alternative currency. You're actually just functioning in dollars and pesos. The same way when you deposit money in PayPal, $10 shows up on your screen for your $10 deposit. It's still dollars. It's just a digital record now. So that's how you stay in local currency. And when you're doing, dollar to peso, euro to pound, pound to rupee, the currency volatility there doesn't really exist because you're just looking at an exchange rate, not a volatile system. And then, we designed the Stellar network to settle faster. So 2 to 5 seconds is what it should be. I say 10 seconds because internet lag is internet lag, and we can't make the internet move faster. But we do believe that speed helps with the other types of risks. And then, as I mentioned before, a transaction fee, instead of being 20 cents per transaction, it's 300,000 transactions per penny, right? So it's a different scale on that. What I think is that when we look at the evolution of these things, Bitcoin will work really well for a lot of these advanced use cases that you're talking about. And I'm really excited to see a lot of those come forward. Stellar, we're a lot more focused on making things interoperable and making them interoperable in a way that makes sense, economic sense for the developing world, right? A lot of these more futuristic smart contracts will be important later, but it doesn't address the healthcare, education, like base level issues that we focus on at Stellar. And then the comment that you had about these systems exist, you're exactly right. You were mentioning about the name. So I'm Korean. My last name is Kim. If you know a Korean, chances are you also know another Kim. right? So we have a lot of people with the same name in our communities as well. I do think it's really important to be able to mimic local cultures and local traditions in our financial systems because money is culture. How each of us split a bill will vary depending on where we're standing in the world, right? So we designed Stellar to let people build what their local services are into the protocol. And at its core, if you remember that remittance kind of path, it's essentially digital hawala, right? When you think about how the network behaves, it becomes that hawala system for everybody that's in there, and it allows for certainly a significant diversity of services that can be built on top of it. And then to get to that last point that the gentleman brought up, how do we make it easy to use? How do we make it make sense? I didn't talk about it a lot in this presentation. I focused on the technology, but about half of my team is focused on an education program. We are an educational not-for-profit and tech not-for-profit. The educational program is focused on making people comfortable with digital financial services, because what we've learned is that there are huge security risks when people are not comfortable with this. I bet you there's probably more than one person in this room right now that has the word password as a password somewhere in their lives. And as we move into environments where people are not as digitally connected as us, we have to teach and share good security practices. So we actually have an entire educational program focused around how do we walk people through account creation, send, receive, and secure their account. And we actually incentivize people with small amounts of digital currency, like nano scholarships. And the idea is that people can afford to lose this stuff that they don't know what it is yet, but I don't want them to risk it with their own money that's in their own currency that they are used to using. So we just basically are developing these systems that will help people become more fluent with the platforms. And what we've learned through our conversations with organizations like the Gates Foundation is that without education, people don't use the tools that are accessible to them. But education is not just telling people once, it's repeated exposure to a platform. And there are significant gender issues involved with that. Women are more likely to give their SIM card to an agent with their password. Men are less likely to do that, partially because women have less access to the device themselves, right? It's not their feature phone, it's somebody else's. So they will give their SIM card to the agent. We have to think about these issues as we design these educational programs. So it's not just the tools, it's how do we become smart as a global community on these topics, and that's what half of our team focuses on.
Thank you very much for that, Joyce. Please, Amy, do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. Well, as to the first question, what are the risks? And you're right. I mean, there are so many common issues amongst all money transmitters. Some that we are not immune to. We have the same liquidity issues as Western Union. We have the same marketing challenges as Stellar or any other startup company. Informing people about our product and getting them comfortable with it and using it are of course challenges. So we do that the same way traditional companies deal with these things. We have very strict liquidity procedures. All of our transactions are prepaid, as you can imagine. I mean, there's no way I'm sending a bank transfer instantly. So all of our transactions are prepaid, and we have to manage that liquidity. That's my job full time. So, addressing those challenges it's very traditional approaches. Where we are innovative is cutting out half of our cost structure by applying Bitcoin technology as a payment mechanism on exactly half of every transaction, which is it's innovative, but it's also good business sense. It costs us nothing to accept Bitcoin, and it costs us almost nothing to integrate with Bitcoin. So I would say, but in terms of the traditional challenges, I don't think there's anything totally revolutionary there. BitPassive versus Stellar, I think Joyce summed it up pretty well. I guess just looking at all your graphs, if anything, we would be one of the nodes, right? So we would be a node, and they're the whole network. So, and hopefully one day that happens. And then regulatory best practice. So that's a great question. It's really difficult to answer because so many different countries are working towards this and have stated opinions, and they're varied. Some countries are stating that Bitcoin is a commodity. Some are stating that it should be considered legal tender. Some are applying VAT. Some aren't. So best practices, there are think tanks working on that. There are not-for-profit legal groups working on that. Hopefully some better sort of white papers and best practice articles are published. There certainly are a handful out there. I think the United States made a great step in the right direction in that Bitcoin businesses are money transmission businesses. You know, our company should be regulated like a money transmitter. Unfortunately, we don't fall exactly in that framework right now, but we are treating ourselves exactly as though we are. We have exactly the currency reserves we need in every currency. We follow the same KYC and AML procedures. We keep track of transactions and are prepared to file suspicious activity reports. So we treat ourselves as though we are under a traditional money transmission license. And I think that's probably best practice across the board until there's more Bitcoin education amongst regulators. And then finally, thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences. I have shared many of those too, because I've had to cash out my M-Pesa and gone to 4 different booths before I find one with enough cash. And I'm not talking a lot. I mean, sometimes it's as little as $10. They're just out of money all the time. So I know. I mean, it's a constant struggle in every country we operate in. But those are the traditional networks that we have to build on top of because that's what people use. You know, in Kenya, there are 85,000 M-Pesa agents. You know, we don't have the resources to open up 85,000 booths and hire 85,000 agents to distribute our product. So, of course, we leverage existing networks. I live in Kenya. This is my business. So I know that big strides are being made in improving those procedures, but whether they'll be perfect tomorrow, you know, of course, all these things take time. But you asked a good question about KYC. So in Kenya and Tanzania, that problem is actually addressed very well in that SIM cards are registered to a national ID. So not just a name, you know, generic Kenyan name, maybe Brian Kamani. It's a very common name, you know, so there are lots of Brian Kamanis out there, but your SIM card is registered to your national ID number. So it isn't just Brian Kamani, it's Brian Kamani 123456. And when you cash out at an M-Pesa booth, you have to show your ID with that number. So that's how they get around that. And I realize that that doesn't apply to all countries. We are pushing into countries that don't have those luxuries. So there are other ways around it, and there are best practices, such as if a beneficiary doesn't have a registered ID, they can show a utility bill or some other form of identification, and when they present it, they are registered and put onto the system. So, you know, it's baby steps, and it'll take a very long time for that to actually capture, you know, huge portions of the population, but at least it's a step in the right direction in countries where they don't have the benefit of that mandatory SIM card registration. Let's see, is there anything else? I think that was it.
Can I add one thing since Amy brought up a really good point on the regulation side? There's actually something I do feel really strongly about on the regulatory front. This is I think one of the most important things that can happen for financial inclusion on a regulatory front is tiered KYC, right? We need to see step-based, risk-based KYC, and this is very important for communities that are migratory, that are in forced migration situations or whatever it may be. Identifying people when they're in transit is hard to do, especially when you're coming from a community that doesn't have a very solid identification system to begin with. So I would love to see more countries moving towards tiered KYC that would allow small amounts of transactions to go forward with a lower identity level. It's just good. It's good for the world.
Thank you very much for your answers. Now, actually, I do have 3 more questions on my list, but I will ask you to refrain from answering those, putting those questions to our speakers, as we are running behind schedule. I hope that that's acceptable for you, with my excuses for you not being able to ask the question. We are running behind the schedule that I was given, and I would, with this, like to actually thank our panelists very much for this extremely interesting hands-on and operational presentations of where we are going. And you are truly working with some pioneering I think we can conclude, and you have put to us the future ideas and necessities to build on, and I think that that's very important and interesting for us. Although I must say that I will, and I think it goes for many people in this room, will not be able to really understand what you are doing. But I think it's an extremely important vehicle for us who are working with the policy making and, you know, making migration work better for development. And actually, thank you very much for making me feel that I'm not such a nincompoop, because I have never used the password. So, thank you very much. Join me in a round of applause.
That is the most interesting session, the precious session, I still put it. So we have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Grab your coffee and come back, and we start.